The November rain hammered down like bullets against the windshield. Lena Wells gripped the handlebars of her scooter, knuckles white, as the engine sputtered and died for the third time in as many minutes. Mile marker 47, on Interstate 93. 2 lanes of traffic screaming past her in the downpour, the spray from 18-wheelers drenching her delivery bag, soaking through the thin jacket that had cost her $8 at a thrift store in Dorchester. She was 28 years old but looked 40. Her face bore the marks of a life lived in the margins, and now, fresh purple bruises bloomed across her throat like flowers growing in contaminated soil. The fingers of her left hand trembled as she reached for the ignition again. Nothing. Just the hollow click of a machine that had finally given up. $17. That was what remained in her pocket after she had paid for this morning's rent on the apartment she shared with her daughter Emma, age 6. $17 to last her for more days until her next delivery shift payment. But 4 days felt like an eternity when the calendar showed her only 10 days remained. 10 days until Douglas Hale's deadline arrived like an executioner's blade. 10 days to raise $85,000 or lose her child forever to a man whose hands had learned to speak only through violence. She pulled her phone from her jacket, its cracked screen flickering with a message that had arrived 43 minutes earlier. From Douglas. From the man who had fathered Emma and then spent 6 years teaching Lena what it meant to have your bones turn to ice while still breathing. You have 10 days, Lena. 85,000. Or Emma comes with me. And you will never see her again. The words lived inside her chest now like a second heartbeat. Every time she inhaled, they expanded. Every time she exhaled, they refused to leave. Headlights appeared through the rain. Not one car. 5 vehicles. Black SUVs moving in perfect formation down the highway, their tires cutting through the water with mechanical precision. The lead vehicle began to slow. Through the downpour, Lena could see the silhouette of the driver, the rigid posture of a man who did not belong in a vehicle moving below 60 miles per hour. The SUV pulled to a stop 6 feet from her scooter. The engine killed. For a moment, nothing moved except the rain. Then the door opened. Italian shoes emerged first. Expensive. The kind of shoes that cost more than she made in a month. They were soaked in highway water within seconds, and the man who wore them did not seem to notice. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, with dark hair slicked back from a face that bore a scar running from his right eye down to his cheekbone like a white river through dark stone. His suit was tailored to fit him like a second skin, charcoal gray, the jacket hanging open to reveal an open white shirt beneath it. Gold cufflinks caught the reflection of her scooter's failing headlight. A cashmere coat hung over his shoulders, the kind of coat that was worth more than her annual salary. He was perhaps 40 years old but carried himself like a man who had lived through centuries of violence and walked out the other side untouched. He knelt beside her scooter. The rain fell between them like a curtain. "What happened to your face?" His voice was deep and solid like an oath, the accent unmistakably Italian, though he had lived in Boston long enough that the sharp edges of Sicily had worn smooth. But there was nothing smooth about his eyes. They were storm gray, penetrating, the eyes of a man accustomed to having his questions answered immediately. Lena looked up at him through her one good eye. The other was swollen completely shut, the skin around it purple-black, the kind of bruising that spoke of a fist connecting with force and precision. Handprints wrapped around her throat in shades of violet and indigo, each finger mark a separate testimony to violence. Her split lip had stopped bleeding an hour ago, but the coppery taste remained in her mouth like a permanent reminder. "My scooter," she said. Her voice trembled like a candle in the wind. "It broke down. I need to get home." He did not look at the scooter. He looked at her throat. He looked at her eye. He looked at the trembling in her hands as she gripped the handlebars, and something shifted in his face. Something cold and dangerous stirred in his chest, the way a predator stirs when it detects blood in the water. "Get in the car," he said. "No." The word came out barely a whisper. "I don't know you." "I can't." "It is not a request." He straightened to his full height, and in doing so, he seemed to block out the rain itself. He was 6'1", maybe 6'2", and the way he stood made it clear he had never in his life met a situation he could not command with the simple power of his presence. Behind him, another vehicle had stopped. 2 men emerged, both wearing black suits, both moving with the careful precision of men trained to handle lethal situations before breakfast. They did not speak. They simply stood at a distance that was far enough away to pretend they were not listening, but close enough to react in 2.3 seconds if their boss required them to. "My name is Nicholas Corsetti." He said his name the way a general surveys a battlefield. "And you are going to tell me who did this to you. But first, you are going to get in the car because if you sit on this highway in this rain for 1 more minute, you are going to develop pneumonia on top of whatever else you are carrying in your body right now. So we are going to move. Now." Before she could protest again, he had already closed his hand around her arm. Not roughly. He was not dragging her. But there was an absolute inevitability in the gesture, the certainty of a man who had decided something and would have it, whether the universe cooperated or not. They moved toward the lead vehicle. The door was already open. The interior was warm, the leather seat still holding the shape of his body from minutes before. He gestured her inside, and she slid across the leather, her wet clothes leaving dark marks on the upholstery that probably cost more than her rent. He settled beside her, and the door closed with a sound like the lid of a coffin being sealed. The driver did not move. The rain continued its assault against the windows. And Nicholas Corsetti turned his full attention to the woman beside him, a woman whose name he did not yet know, whose story he was about to discover would change the trajectory of his entire life, though he stood at the edge of that truth without yet seeing it. "Who are you?" he asked. His voice remained calm, but there was an edge to it now, a blade wrapped in civility. "Lena Wells," she said. "I'm a delivery driver." "What is your daughter's name?" Her entire body went rigid. She had not mentioned a daughter. She had not mentioned anything except the scooter. "How did you?" "There is a school backpack in the basket of your scooter. Pink, with a drawing of a house on it. A child's drawing. The house has a mother figure in front of it and a small girl figure holding her hand. No father figure. So either you are unmarried or you are in the process of leaving, and the bruises on your throat tell me it is not a voluntary separation." He paused. "What is her name?" "Emma," Lena whispered. "She's 6. He nodded slowly. Outside, the rain fell harder. The sound of it filled the interior of the SUV like a heartbeat that refused to slow down. "And the man who did that to your face?" Lena did not answer. But her hands began to shake, and that silence was answer enough. Nicholas Corsetti had spent his entire life reading the language of violence. He could read it in a person's posture, in the dilation of their pupils, in the way their breath came shallow and quick. This woman had been beaten, but more than that, she had been controlled through fear. The bruises were fresh, maybe 2 hours old, which meant it had happened while she was supposed to be working. Which meant it had happened in public, or in a place where people were nearby, which meant the man who had done it did not care who saw. Which meant he had the kind of power that made him believe he could do anything. "We're going to my restaurant," Nicholas said quietly. "You are going to sit in a private booth where no one will see you. You are going to drink something hot and let my people look at those injuries. And then you are going to tell me everything." "I can't afford." "Lena." He said her name once, and it silenced her. "This is not something you can afford or not afford. This is something that is happening." The SUV pulled back onto the highway. Behind it, for more vehicles followed in formation, a convoy moving through the Boston night like a predator returning to its lair. And in the back seat, a woman with $17 in her pocket and 10 days left on a countdown began to shake so violently that Nicholas Corsetti removed his cashmere coat and draped it around her shoulders. The coat was warm. It smelled like expensive cologne and something else, something darker, something that spoke of a life lived in the spaces between law and consequence. She should have been terrified. She should have asked him to stop the vehicle. She should have done 1,000 things. Instead, she began to cry. The SUV pulled into the underground parking garage of Corsetti's, a 3-Michelin-star restaurant hidden on a side street in Boston's North End. 12 stories of marble and mahogany and wine collections worth more than entire apartment buildings. Nicholas guided Lena through a private entrance, past the kitchen where sous chefs moved in perfect silence, to a booth in the back corner where candlelight flickered against windows that looked out onto rain-soaked streets. She sat across from him, still wearing his cashmere coat, still shaking. Her face was a geography of bruises, purple spreading across her left cheekbone, her bottom lip swollen and split, handprints in shades of black and blue wrapped around her throat like a column of violence. A server appeared with water, with warmth, with the kind of attention that made Lena want to disappear into the leather seat. "Drink," Nicholas said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. "Tell me your name. Your real story. Not the version you tell people when you want them to leave you alone." She drank. The water was cool against her split lip, and she tasted copper and salt and something like surrender. "Lena Wells," she whispered. "I'm 26. I deliver food for Grub Quick. I have a daughter. Emma. She's 5 years old. Tell me about the man who did this." Lena's hands began to shake again. She pressed them flat against the table. "Douglas Hale. He's Emma's father. We were together for 3 years, and for 2 of those years he was good to me, or at least I thought he was. He paid for things. He made me feel like I mattered. But then he started to control everything, where I went, what I wore, who I could talk to. And then he started to hurt me when I didn't listen. It got worse. It got so much worse. I left him when Emma was 2. I got a protective order. I changed my phone number and I moved across the city and I thought I was done with him." She stopped, unable to continue. "But he found you," Nicholas said. It was not a question. 3 weeks ago. He showed up at the apartment. He was drunk. He said he had gotten sober, that he had cleaned himself up, that he wanted to know his daughter. I told him no. I told him to stay away from us. And he grabbed me by the throat and he slammed me against the wall and he said," her voice broke like a dropped glass. "He said I was nothing without him. That Emma was going to forget me. That he was going to take her away and I would never find them. And then he hit me." Nicholas's hands curled into fists. He set them on the table where she could see them. "That was 3 nights ago," Lena continued, the words pouring out now like she had been holding them in a locked box for years. "He came back yesterday. He said he had lawyers. He said he had filed paperwork. He said I had 10 days to give him $85,000 or he was taking Emma and leaving the country. He said he had connections in Mexico, that people owed him favors, that I would never see her again." $85,000, Nicholas repeated. "I have $17, Lena said. That's what's in my wallet right now. $17. I've been delivering food for 14 hours a day for 4 months and I have $17. I don't eat much. I take Emma to the free clinic. I spend everything on her school, on keeping her safe, on keeping us in an apartment that's barely bigger than a closet. There is no way to get that money. There is no way." The booth fell silent except for the sound of rain against the window and the distant music of the restaurant, a piano playing something classical and mournful, the kind of song they play in places where people come to forget their troubles by paying $300 for a plate of pasta. "You said you work for Grub Quick," Nicholas said. "Tell me a delivery day." Lena closed her eyes. She could see it perfectly because she lived it every day. Alarm at 5:47 in the morning. Emma's still sleeping. She sleeps on the bed. I sleep on the couch because it folds out and I can keep one hand on her while I sleep, just in case she has a nightmare. The apartment is so cold. The landlord doesn't fix the heat. I get up and I drink 2 glasses of water so I don't feel empty. I shower in cold water because the hot water costs money. I put on the Grub Quick uniform, a polo shirt that's getting thin at the shoulders from washing it so many times. I kiss Emma on the forehead and I leave her with Mrs. Chen next door. Mrs. Chen watches her for $5 a day. That's $35 a week out of my delivery tips. She opened her eyes and looked at him. I pick up my scooter from the parking lot. It's a 2009 Vespa, the model that breaks down constantly. The chain comes off at least once a week. The tires are bald. In November, the rain gets into the electrical system and everything starts to misfire. But it's paid for, which means I don't have a car payment. I get to the restaurant supply house at 6:30 and I pick up the first order. I deliver to Beacon Hill, to the brownstones where people sleep until 9 a.m. and then complain that their coffee is too hot. Then to the financial district. Then to Back Bay. 6 deliveries before noon. On a good day, I get $4 in tips. On a bad day, 0. Yesterday I delivered to a woman in a penthouse in the Prudential Center. The ride up was so high I felt dizzy. She ordered $200 worth of food. I waited for the elevator to come back down, and when I came back up, she opened the door and gave me $2. She told me I was 30 seconds late. She said I should be more professional. Did you take the money? Nicholas asked. I took it, Lena said. I always take it. Because 30 seconds late or 30 seconds early doesn't matter when you only have $17 and a daughter who needs to eat. The server appeared again, this time with bread, fresh focaccia with olive oil, still warm. Lena stared at it like it was a hallucination. Eat, Nicholas said. She ate. The bread was soft and perfect and tasted like butter and salt, and she had to stop herself from crying because a person should not cry over bread, but when you have been counting calories for as long as she had been, a perfect piece of bread becomes an act of grace. How much were you studying to be? Nicholas asked. Lena swallowed hard. A nurse, she said. I had a scholarship to community college. I was working through the prerequisites at night after Emma was asleep. I had 2 years left. But then Douglas found me and took the scholarship. He said if I didn't drop out, he would make sure I never worked again. So I dropped out. I don't know why I'm telling you all of this. You don't care about my life. I care, Nicholas said, and something in his voice made her believe him. I care because the man who hurt you believed you were beneath his notice. He believed you had no power. He believed he could do this to you and nothing would happen to him because you are nobody, and nobody matters. But I need you to understand something, Lena. The people who did this to you are wrong. You are not nobody. And what happened to you is not going to happen again. He said it like a man making a promise to God. Meanwhile, across the city, in a studio apartment on the edge of Dorchester, Douglas Hale was drinking whiskey and making phone calls. He was tall, muscular in the way men get when they lift weights in prison to feel powerful, with a scar running from his left eye down to his jaw and tattoos on his knuckles that spelled out words in Latin nobody should know. He was 32 years old and he had been in prison twice and he had no money and no prospects and the only thing he had was the knowledge that Lena would do anything to keep her daughter safe. She doesn't have the money yet, he said into the phone, his voice like venom. But she will get it. Or I will take the kid and she will spend the rest of her life looking for her. He hung up and drank more whiskey and did not know that 3 miles away, in a restaurant with 3 Michelin stars, a woman was telling a man with $17 million in his vault exactly how much it cost to disappear a child. 10 days was not much time. But Nicholas Corsetti had done more impossible things. The November rain fell like a blade wrapped in ice across Boston's empty highways. Lena Wells sat hunched over the steering wheel of her delivery scooter, her hand shaking so badly she could barely grip the handles. The engine had died 3 miles back on IR-93, and now she was stranded in the darkness with nothing but the sound of her own breathing and the relentless percussion of water hammering down from the black sky above. Blood mixed with rainwater on her swollen face. Her left eye had swollen shut hours ago. The handprints bruising her throat felt like they were tightening with each breath she took. She had exactly 10 days. 10 days to raise $85,000 or lose her daughter Emma forever. She had $17 in her pocket. 17. A pair of headlights cut through the downpour from behind. Then another. Then another. Black SUVs, a convoy of them, emerging from the rain like something from a nightmare she could not wake from. The vehicle slowed. 3 men in tailored suits stepped out into the storm, water streaming down their faces, their movement synchronized and deliberate. The one in the middle was taller than the others, 6'1", broad-shouldered, with dark hair plastered against his temples and a scar running from the outer corner of his left eye down to his jawline like a permanent reminder of survival. This was Nicholas Corsetti, 38 years old, owner of half the underworld machinery that kept this city breathing. His suit cost more than Lena had earned in 6 months. His watch alone could feed her and Emma for a year. He stared down at her broken form on the highway, rain soaking through his Italian wool, and something moved behind his eyes. Something cold and dangerous and unexpectedly human. "Get her in the car," he said, his voice deep and solid like an oath carved into stone. The men obeyed without question. They wrapped her in a coat that smelled like expensive cologne and leather, and she was lifted into the back seat of the lead SUV. Through the fog of pain and shock, she heard one of them, Carlo, the stockier one with grey threading through his dark hair, ask a question. "Hospital, boss." Nicholas Corsetti did not answer immediately. He was looking at her face, at the bruises, at the terror in her one good eye. "Corsetti's," he finally said. "The back room." 20 minutes later, Lena woke to candlelight and the soft murmur of jazz piano drifting from somewhere in the darkness beyond the private booth. She was wrapped in a blanket that felt like it had been made from clouds. A first aid kit sat open on the mahogany table in front of her. Her scooter helmet rested beside it, tilted on its side like a broken shell. The booth itself was a small island of warmth in an otherwise cavernous restaurant, dark wood, leather seats worn soft from years of important conversations, windows streaked with rain that caught the candlelight and threw it back in dancing fragments of gold and amber. Nicholas Corsetti sat across from her, his suit jacket gone, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. His hands were large and scarred, the hands of a man who had done things in the dark that daylight would not forgive. He was watching her with an intensity that made her want to disappear into the booth cushions. "You are safe here," he said quietly. "No one will hurt you." She tried to stand. The blanket fell away from her shoulders. "I need to go. My daughter. Emma is alone. I have to." He raised one hand, a gesture so subtle it should have meant nothing, but something in the way he moved made her stop. "Carlo is watching your apartment. Your daughter is asleep. She is safe." The words hung between them like a blade suspended in the air. Lena's entire body went rigid. "You followed me," she whispered. "Yes." "Why?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, and the candlelight caught the scar on his face, turning it silver. "Who did that to your face?" She touched her swollen eye with trembling fingers and felt nothing but pain. The silence stretched until she could hear her own heartbeat, until the soft jazz from the kitchen sounded like it was playing in another world. Finally, she began to speak. The words came out in fragments, broken things that she tried to reassemble into something that made sense. Douglas Hale. Her ex, tall, muscular in the way men get when they need to feel powerful, with cold eyes and a smile that never reached them. He was 32 years old and wealthy, the kind of wealthy that came from his family's pharmaceutical business, the kind that made him believe he could do anything and nothing would ever happen to him. He wanted custody of Emma. Not because he loved her. Because he could not tolerate losing control. He had given Lena an ultimatum, delivered with his fists when she refused to comply. $85,000, Lena said, and her voice cracked on the number. "That is what he wants. I have 10 days. I have $17 in my pocket. 17. I deliver food on a broken scooter. How am I supposed to find $85,000 in 10 days? Nicholas listened without moving. Franco, one of his lieutenants, entered silently with 2 small cups of espresso, saw the way Nicholas was looking at her, and froze for just a fraction of a second, a pause so brief most people would have missed it. but Lena caught it. She saw Franco's eyes widen slightly. She watched as he withdrew from the booth and whispered something urgent to Carlo just beyond the doorway. In 15 years of working for Nicholas Corsetti, Franco had never seen him look at anyone like this. Nicholas pushed the espresso toward her. "Drink," he said. "It will help with the shock." She wrapped her hands around the cup. The warmth felt like the first kind thing her body had experienced in months. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "I am nobody. A woman with a scooter and a broken life." "You are not nobody," Nicholas said, and something in his tone made her believe him. He leaned back in the booth, his scarred hands folded on the table in front of him. 2 years ago, I had a brother. His name was Vincent. He made a choice. He decided that loyalty was less important than money, less important than survival. He sold family secrets to the Salerno family. I had to make a choice after that. Mercy or survival. He paused, and in that pause, Lena heard everything he was not saying. She heard the weight of a decision that had destroyed him from the inside. I chose survival, he continued quietly. My brother died. I have spent every day since wondering if there was another way. You are trying to save your daughter by destroying yourself. I understand that choice. I understand it because I have lived it. The door to the restaurant swung open. A man in an expensive suit walked in, shaking water from his shoulders, arrogance radiating from him like heat. Marco Salerno, nephew of the Salerno crime family, 28 years old and reckless, the kind of reckless that comes from knowing people would always clean up your messes. His eyes found Lena in the booth and his smile turned predatory. New toy, Nicholas. His voice dripped contempt. Did not know you picked up strays. Nicholas rose from the booth without appearing to hurry. His hand found Marco's throat before Marco even registered that he was moving. The impact slammed him against the wall hard enough to crack plaster. The restaurant fell into absolute silence. No jazz piano. No kitchen sounds. Just the sound of Marco choking and the soft patter of rain against windows. Get out, Nicholas said, his voice so quiet Lena had to lean forward to hear it. And understand this. Touch her and I will bury you next to your uncle. Marco's face had turned purple. He nodded frantically. Nicholas released him and Marco stumbled toward the exit, gasping, one hand at his throat. The door swung shut behind him and the jazz piano resumed as if nothing had happened, and Lena realized she was shaking so badly the espresso was sloshing in her cup. Nicholas returned to the booth. He did not explain what had just happened. He simply sat down and looked at her with eyes that had seen too much darkness. You and your daughter will stay at one of my properties. You will be protected. And Douglas Hale will no longer be a problem. Across the city, in a penthouse office on the 32nd floor of a glass tower overlooking Boston Harbor, a woman was making a phone call. Cordelia Blackwood, 52 years old, silver-haired, dressed in a tailored suit that cost more than most people's annual salary. She ran a network of corrupt officials and judges from this office, wielding power that no single person should ever possess. Her fingers drummed on mahogany as Douglas Hale's voice crackled through the phone speaker. We have a problem, Douglas said. Nicholas Corsetti has the girl. Cordelia's eyes narrowed. The delivery girl? Why would he care? I do not know, Douglas said, and there was fear in his voice now, the sound of a man realizing his power was smaller than he had believed. But if he is involved, he will find out about everything. The custody arrangement. The false debt. He will ruin us both. Cordelia took a long drag on her cigarette, thinking. The city lights reflected in the glass behind her, 1,000 tiny flames in the darkness. Then we accelerate. You have the judge in your pocket. Yes, but... File the emergency custody motion tomorrow morning, Cordelia interrupted. Take the child before he can interfere. Once you have her, he cannot touch you. A man like Nicholas Corsetti will not risk open war in the courts. She was wrong. She did not yet understand that some men would burn the entire city down if it meant protecting someone they had decided to save. She hung up the phone without waiting for a response. Back in the private booth at Corsetti's restaurant, Lena pulled a small object from her jacket pocket. It was worn smooth from decades of handling, a prayer card with a faded image of St. Christopher on one side and a handwritten note on the back. Her grandmother's writing, shaky but determined. "Help comes when you need it most," she whispered, showing it to him. Nicholas read the words slowly, and something shifted behind his scarred face. Something ancient and wounded, and finally, for the first time in 2 years, something that felt like hope. The door to the private booth swung open. Carlo stood silhouetted against the candlelight, his phone in one hand, his expression grave. "Boss," he said, and the single word carried an entire conversation of urgency. "We have a problem. Douglas Hale just filed an emergency custody motion. The hearing is set for tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Lena's entire body went cold. The prayer card slipped from her fingers and fell to the table. Her daughter, Emma, asleep in an apartment guarded by men she did not know, while a judge somewhere in this city was signing papers that would take her away forever. 10 days had just become 10 hours. Nicholas Corsetti did not move. He did not speak. He simply closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, something had shifted inside him. Something that had been dormant for 2 years, waiting in the darkness, finally waking up. Sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. The rain fell in sheets across the Boston skyline, each drop striking the windows of the safe house like bullets against glass. Inside, on the 4th floor overlooking the harbor, Lena Wells stood motionless in the doorway of the bedroom where Emma slept. Her daughter's breathing was shallow, even, the sound of a child who had cried herself into exhaustion. Lena did not move. She could not move. Every muscle in her body had locked the moment the sheriff's deputies walked out with that custody order in their hands, Emma screaming, reaching backward, her small fingers clawing at the air where her mother had stood seconds before. That was 6 hours ago. Now the clock on the wall read 3 in the morning. The kind of hour when the world feels like it has ended and no one has noticed yet. Carlo sat in the main room, phone pressed to his ear, his jaw working silently as he listened to whatever news was coming from the streets. Franco paced the length of the kitchen, coffee growing cold in his hands, his knuckles still bruised from where he had slammed his fist against the counter when the deputies took Emma from the apartment. Nicholas Corsetti had not moved from the doorway for 2 hours. He stood with his shoulders against the frame, arms crossed, the scar running down his left cheekbone catching the dim light. His suit was still perfectly pressed, his shirt still crisp white, but his face had transformed into something carved from stone. Grief had a way of making even powerful men look small. It was not that he had aged in those 6 hours. It was something closer to the opposite, as if he had retreated inward, into some cold place where time moved differently. Lena finally turned from Emma's doorway. She looked at him across the shadowed space between them, and in her eyes was something that broke him more than any scream could have. "She called for me," Lena whispered. "When they took her, she called my name. 3 times. 3. Nicholas did not respond. What was there to say? Words were useless architecture now, built on a foundation that had crumbled. He had spent 2 years learning to live without feeling anything. 2 years of calculated moves, strategic decisions, the kind of cold logic that separated men like him from ordinary people. But Emma's voice, that small, terrified call of "Mommy, Mommy, Mommy," had stripped away every wall he had built. Lena moved toward the window. The prayer card was still in her pocket, soaked through, her grandmother's handwriting barely visible. She had pulled it out 5, maybe 6 times in the past hours. Each time it broke something else inside her. "He is taking her," she said. "By morning, by tomorrow, he will be gone. He will disappear with her, and no court in this city will care. I am nobody. I have nothing. Why would anyone help me?" The November rain intensified, wind howling down from the harbor like something alive and furious. Lena's hands gripped the window sill until her knuckles turned white, the same white as bone, the same white as a death certificate. Nicholas finally moved. He crossed the space between them in 3 steps, and without speaking, he took her hands in his own. His hands were warm. She had not realized how cold she had become until she felt his warmth, and the contrast was almost unbearable. "You are going to look at me," he said. His voice was steady, but it carried something underneath, an oath, a promise, a blade wrapped in quiet certainty. "You are going to look at me and you are going to hear what I am about to tell you." She looked at him. "Douglas Hale made a calculation," Nicholas said. "He believed that you were alone. That you had no one. That the world does not see people like you, and therefore the world would not see what he did to you. He was wrong." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a phone. On the screen was a photograph, old, maybe 15 years, the image grainy but unmistakable. It showed a younger Douglas Hale with a woman whose face had been scratched out. The caption beneath was dated 2009. "Your grandmother's prayer card," Nicholas said. The name on the back: Maria Castellano. She had a sister named Rosa. Rosa had a daughter. That daughter filed a missing persons report in 2008 that was never investigated, never followed up. Douglas Hale's name appeared in the original file, then disappeared when his father hired the right lawyers. Lena stared at the photograph, her mind struggling to assemble meaning from the pieces. "We have been searching all night," Nicholas continued. "We have found bank transfers. Payments to judges, to police captains, to people who erased records. We found evidence of extortion dating back a decade. We found everything we needed to bury him." Behind him, Carlo appeared in the doorway, phone still in his hand. His expression was grim, but something else lived behind it: resolve, determination, the look of a man who had made a call that would reshape the city. "The federal contacts are in place," Carlo said. His voice was like gravel, rough from hours of negotiation. "They will move at dawn. Dual operation. Hale first, then Blackwood. Cordelia Blackwood." Even her name was poison. The woman had been orchestrating this entire scheme from above, pulling strings, making calls, ensuring that nothing could touch her. She had connections that reached into state government, into federal agencies, into the kind of darkness that sunlight never touched. Nicholas returned his attention to Lena. "When the sun comes up, your daughter will be returned to you. Legally. Permanently. And the men who tried to take her will spend the rest of their lives in a cell, thinking about the moment they underestimated the woman they were trying to destroy." Lena's legs gave way. She sank into the nearest chair, and for the first time in 6 hours, she allowed herself to breathe. Not hope, that was too fragile a thing to hold on to. But something like permission to believe that the world had not ended after all. The rain continued, relentless, but at 3:47 in the morning, the first federal agents were moving into position. At 3:52, they cut the power to Douglas Hale's estate in the suburbs. At 4:03, exactly, the black SUVs arrived at his home. 12 vehicles. 44 agents. Dawn was still 90 minutes away, but the operation could not wait. Timing was precision. Timing was the difference between a man disappearing and a man being caught. The front door of the estate came down in a single coordinated strike. Agents moved through the darkness with weapons drawn, their footsteps echoing through halls decorated with wealth that would soon be seized, converted into evidence, itemized and photographed for a trial that would last 3 years. Douglas Hale was in his study. He had not slept. He sat at his desk, sipping scotch from a crystal glass that cost more than Lena made in a month, reviewing documents with his lawyer. Emma was asleep in a guest room 2 doors down, a nurse sitting outside her door, paid to watch the child he had stolen. The study door burst inward. "Douglas Hale, you are under arrest for extortion, conspiracy, child endangerment, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit fraud." The agent's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. "You have the right to remain silent." Douglas stood so quickly his chair overturned. The glass of scotch fell to the carpet, a stain blooming like blood across imported wool. His lawyer moved immediately into protecting the client mode, but Douglas's face had already transformed. The confidence drained from it like water from a broken vessel. His hands were shaking. "This is a mistake," he said, but his voice betrayed him. "I have lawyers. I am a pharmaceutical executive. I have done nothing illegal." "You cannot." "We can and we have," the agent replied. "Financial records. Recorded threats. A witness statement. The original missing persons file from 2008. Evidence of bribery. Evidence of coercion. The courts have authorized this operation." Douglas backed away, stumbling, his expensive Italian shoes catching on the overturned chair. "You do not understand. I have connections. I have money. I will pay whatever fine, settle whatever, please, just let me." But the agents were already moving. Handcuffs clicked around his wrists. He was read his rights as he was escorted from the study, from the house, into the back of a federal transport vehicle that pulled away as the sky was just beginning to lighten. Emma was collected by a child welfare officer who was waiting in the next room. The nurse who had been watching her said nothing as the officer gently woke the child and explained that she was being taken somewhere safe. Emma did not cry. She did not speak. She simply held the officer's hand and walked out of the house. Meanwhile, across the city, at 6:42 in the morning, a second operation was unfolding. Cordelia Blackwood's penthouse occupied the entire 31st floor of a building in downtown Boston. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the harbor. Her furniture was curated by European designers. Her art collection was worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. She stood in her living room wearing a silk robe, drinking coffee from a cup that had been hand-painted in Vienna, watching the dawn light paint the water gold. She did not know that FBI agents were already in the building. Did not know that her security team had been compromised hours ago. Did not know that the moment she took her next breath, her life would cease to exist as she understood it. The penthouse door came open. "Cordelia Margaret Blackwood, you are under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy, bribery of public officials, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit fraud." Cordelia turned slowly. Her expression did not change. She had prepared for this moment in some distant corner of her mind, the possibility that someone, someday, might be powerful enough to reach her. But she had always believed that moment would come later. Not now. Not when she had not finished her coffee. "I want my lawyer," she said simply. "You will have your lawyer," the agent replied. "But first, you are going to explain these bank transfers. You are going to explain these recordings. You are going to explain why you paid judges to rule in Douglas Hale's favor. You are going to explain the entire network." Cordelia's face remained composed, but her hands betrayed her. They trembled slightly as the agent approached with handcuffs. She set her coffee cup on the table, Vienna porcelain, and extended her wrists. The handcuffs clicked with the finality of a coffin lid closing. By 7:15 in the morning, both arrests had gone live across every news channel in Boston. By 8, the story had spread to national outlets. By 9, the internet had begun the process of destruction that Cordelia Blackwood could not have imagined: exposure of her network, release of financial records, images of her leaving the courthouse in handcuffs, her face broadcast into millions of homes. 12 hours later, the federal prosecutor stood on the courthouse steps. Rain had begun again, gentle this time, cleansing rain rather than the violent downpour that had accompanied Lena's darkest hour. "Today, justice has been served," the prosecutor said, his voice carrying across the plaza. "Douglas Hale has been charged on 18 counts and faces a minimum of 25 years in federal prison. Cordelia Blackwood has been charged on 23 counts and has been sentenced to 40 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. This concludes one of the most extensive corruption investigations in Massachusetts history." Cameras flashed. The prosecutor continued, but his words became background noise to the simple fact: the world had stopped. At the safe house, Lena held Emma against her chest. Her daughter's small arms were wrapped around her neck, and the child was repeating one phrase over and over: "You did not leave. You did not leave. You did not leave. I will never leave, Lena whispered into her daughter's hair. Never. Nicholas stood in the doorway, watching them, and something shifted in his scarred face. Something that had been frozen for 2 years began to thaw. Carlo and Franco stood behind him, and neither spoke, because some moments belong entirely to silence. The rain fell softly outside. The November wind had gentled. And for the first time in 10 days, the impossible had become real. The federal courthouse in Boston stood gray and monumental against the November morning. Rain fell in sheets, the kind of rain that stripped the world down to its essential colors: black pavement, white stone, the red and blue of police lights cutting through the downpour like blades. At 7:15 in the morning, both arrests had gone live across every news channel. Douglas Hale walked in handcuffs, his face contorted with rage and terror, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from dark water. Cordelia Blackwood emerged moments later, her designer coat soaked through, her expression a mask of calculated control that was finally, irrevocably cracking. But that was the ending. To understand how 2 of Boston's most dangerous players fell so completely, we must return to the night before. 12 hours earlier, at 7 in the evening, Nicholas Corsetti stood in his private office on the top floor of the Corsetti building. The room was all dark wood and leather, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a space designed to remind every person who entered it that they were in the presence of someone who controlled everything they could see. He was 6'2", broad-shouldered, dressed in a black Armani suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. His face was carved from stone, high cheekbones, a jawline like a blade, and a scar running from his right eye to his cheekbone, a permanent reminder of the night his brother Vincent had betrayed him 2 years ago. His eyes were dark as winter water, the kind of eyes that had ordered men to disappear and meant it. In his hand, he held a small card, worn and creased, the edges soft from being handled countless times. It was no bigger than his palm. On it, in faded handwriting, were these words: "When you are at the end of yourself, look for the hand reaching out. It might be the only miracle you get." He had found it in Lena Wells's jacket pocket the night he brought her to his safe house. She had not seen him holding it. She had not known that he had spent the last 10 days reading it over and over, the same way a man drowning reads a map to shore. The rain hammered against the windows. Carlo knocked twice, a specific rhythm, a code, and entered without waiting for permission. Carlo was built like a concrete barrier, 53 years old, his suit perfectly tailored despite the breadth of his shoulders. He had been with Nicholas for 22 years. In those 22 years, he had never once questioned an order. "The raids are prepared," Carlo said. His voice was low, gravelly from decades of cigarette smoked in dark rooms. 48 men across for locations. We hit Douglas Hale's warehouse at midnight. The federal agents hit Cordelia's estate at the same moment. They do not know what is coming. Nicholas did not respond immediately. He was looking at the prayer card, turning it slowly in his long fingers. His hands bore the marks of the life he had lived: silver rings, a Rolex that cost $80,000, scars running across his knuckles like a map of every man he had ever hurt. "How is Lena?" he asked finally. "At the safe house. With Emma. Franco is there. The child is sleeping. Lena has not slept." Carlo paused. The medical team cleared her injuries. The photographs are all documented. Her testimony is prepared. And Douglas Hale does not suspect anything. He is at his apartment in the North End, finishing dinner, checking his phone every 8 seconds because he is terrified that Lena will not come through with the remaining $68,000. Carlo's expression did not change. He is about to learn what terror actually means. Nicholas set the prayer card on his desk and looked at Carlo directly. In that moment, something in his scarred face shifted. Something cold and professional became something else, something that looked almost like mercy. "When this is over," Nicholas said, "Lena Wells walks away from me. She walks toward a life that is not carved from darkness. She takes her daughter and she builds something real. Do you understand?" Carlo was silent for a long moment. In 22 years, he had heard Nicholas Corsetti issue many orders. He had heard him command executions, orchestrate takeovers, destroy competitors and traitors with methodical precision. But he had never heard him issue an order like this one, an order to let someone go. "Yes," Carlo said finally. "I understand." At the safe house across the city, Lena Wells sat on the edge of a bed in a room that smelled like antiseptic and expensive fabric. The safe house was a 6-bedroom mansion in Brookline, the kind of property that cost $3 million and was used for purposes no one spoke about aloud. The walls were pale gray. The furniture was modern and cold. The windows were bulletproof. She was 28 years old and looked 40. Her face bore the marks of 10 days of terror, dark circles under her eyes so deep they looked bruised, her jawline sharp from not eating, her hands trembling continuously. She wore clean clothes provided by Nicholas's staff, and they hung on her frame like a costume for someone else's life. The bruises on her throat had faded to yellow and green, and she found herself touching them constantly, as if to confirm they were real, as if the fact that they were fading meant that what happened had truly occurred. On the bed beside her lay Emma, age 6, sleeping with her thumb in her mouth and a drawing clutched in her small fist. The drawing was of 2 figures holding hands, one tall, one small, and above them, a yellow circle meant to be the sun. Emma had drawn it that afternoon and given it to Lena without speaking, and Lena had wept so hard she could not see. A knock came at the door. Franco entered, younger than Carlo, perhaps 40, with the kind of face that looked gentle until you understood what those gentle eyes had witnessed. He held 2 cups of tea and set them on the nightstand. "You should drink," he said quietly. "You should try to sleep." "I cannot sleep while Nicholas is putting himself in danger," Lena said. Her voice sounded like it had been dragged across broken glass. "I cannot sleep knowing that what is happening tonight is because of me. These are not his enemies. These are mine. He is risking everything because I asked for help." Franco sat down in the chair across from the bed, keeping a respectful distance. He was supposed to guard Lena and Emma, to ensure that neither of them left and neither of them were reached. But something about the way she sat, rigid, terrified, unable to accept that rescue was happening, made him break protocol slightly. "Do you know how long I have worked for Nicholas Corsetti?" Franco asked. Lena shook her head. 17 years. In 17 years, I have watched him make decisions that were calculated, cold, efficient. I have never seen him make a decision that was not designed to expand his power or protect his empire. But 3 days ago, he sat in a room with 12 of our most senior men and said these exact words: "Everything Cordelia Blackwood owns, everything Douglas Hale has built, every connection they possess, we dismantle it. We do not take it. We destroy it. And we leave no trace of corruption that the federal government cannot find and prosecute." Do you understand what that means? Lena was quiet. It means he is choosing justice over profit. It means he is choosing you over himself. Franco stood up. "So please, sleep. Let us do what we came to do." He left the room before she could respond. Lena looked at Emma, still sleeping, still holding that drawing. She picked it up and held it against her chest, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to believe that the hand reaching out might actually be strong enough to hold her. At midnight, the first explosion came. The warehouse on the harbor where Douglas Hale stored his inventory, fake documentation, fraudulent contracts, the physical evidence of a decade-long extortion scheme, erupted in controlled fire. No one was inside. No one was ever intended to be inside. The explosion was a message, not an act of violence. It said, everything you built is gone. Simultaneously, at Cordelia Blackwood's estate in Weston, federal agents moved through the mansion with the precision of a surgical strike. They had warrants for everything: financial records, communications, the names of every official she had corrupted. In the master bedroom, they found Cordelia standing in front of her closet, still in her evening gown, staring at clothes she would never wear again. She understood, in that moment, that she had lost. At his apartment in the North End, Douglas Hale heard sirens and rushed to the window. His phone rang, his warehouse manager, screaming that everything was gone. Then another call, his legal team, telling him that the FBI was on their way. Then the knock at his door, loud and final, and men in black clothing who would not tell him why he was being arrested, only that he was under arrest, and everything he had ever threatened Lena with, every ounce of power he had wielded over her, dissolved like smoke. By 4 in the morning, both men were in holding cells. By 6, the evidence was being presented to federal prosecutors. By 7:15, the arrests were announced on every news channel in Boston. The federal prosecutor stood on the courthouse steps, rain falling steadily, his voice clear and unwavering. Douglas Hale has been charged on 18 counts of extortion, fraud, and child endangerment. He faces a minimum of 25 years in federal prison. Cordelia Blackwood has been charged on 23 counts, including conspiracy, bribery of public officials, and wire fraud. She has been sentenced to 40 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. This concludes one of the most extensive corruption investigations in Massachusetts history. At the safe house, Lena stood by the window with Emma in her arms. Her daughter had woken at dawn, confused and frightened, asking where Mommy was. "I am right here," Lena had whispered. "I am right here, and I am never leaving." The television showed the courthouse, showed Douglas Hale's face twisted in rage, showed Cordelia Blackwood's composure finally shattering. And Lena understood, in a way that was almost too much to comprehend, that it was over. All of it. The threats, the impossible deadline, the feeling that the world was crushing her from every direction, it was over. Franco knocked, and when Lena opened the door, Nicholas stood in the hallway. He was still wearing the black suit from the night before. He was covered in dust from the warehouse, his scar more visible in the early light, his dark eyes exhausted but fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "It is finished," he said simply. Emma, who had learned to fear most men, looked at him and held out her drawing. "I made this," she said. "It is you and my mommy. The sun is because you brought her back into the light." Nicholas took the drawing as if it were the most precious thing anyone had ever handed him. He looked at it for a long moment, and something in his scarred face, something that had been frozen solid since the night his brother betrayed him, began to thaw. "Thank you," he said to Emma. "I will keep this forever." That evening, Lena and Nicholas sat in the private booth of Corsetti's restaurant, the same booth where he had first brought her, bleeding and broken. The candlelight flickered between them. The rain tapped against the windows, softer now, gentler. Emma was asleep in a room upstairs, finally at peace. Lena reached across the table and took the prayer card that Nicholas had placed there. Her grandmother's handwriting was still visible, still perfect, still true. "Why did you help me?" she asked quietly. Nicholas was silent for a long moment. He looked at the card, then at her, then at his hands. "The night my brother Vincent betrayed me, I was ready to walk away from everything," he said. His voice was deep and solid, like an oath carved into stone. "I was in a church, a place I did not believe in, surrounded by people I did not trust. I was ready to disappear into the darkness permanently. But a priest, someone I had never seen before and have never seen since, sat beside me. He did not speak much. He just said one sentence, 'You are not alone in this darkness.' I did not believe him. But he stayed there, sitting beside me, until I believed it enough to leave that church and keep living." He paused. "When I saw you on that highway, broken and bleeding and fighting so hard to survive for your daughter, I saw myself 2 years ago. I saw what it felt like to have nothing left but the need to keep living. And I knew that I could either let you disappear into that darkness alone, or I could sit beside you until you believed that you were not alone anymore." Lena's eyes filled with tears. She did not try to hide them. "You saved my life," she whispered. Nicholas shook his head slowly. "No. You saved mine. I have been dead inside since Vincent died, dead in a way that no one could see, but dead nonetheless. Every decision I made was designed to add more corpses to that pile, to build walls higher so that nothing and no one could ever hurt me again. But you reminded me what it feels like to protect someone instead of destroy them. You reminded me what it feels like to be alive. He reached across the table and took her hand. For the first time in her life, Lena did not pull away. "I do not expect anything from you," Nicholas continued. "Except this: stay. Build a life. Bring Emma to the restaurant. Let me teach her to make pasta the way my grandmother taught me. Let me be the kind of man that your daughter can draw in the sunlight, instead of hiding from. That is all I am asking." "And what about you?" Lena asked. "What will you do?" Nicholas looked at the prayer card, then back at her. "I will become someone worth staying for. I will legitimize everything that can be legitimized. I will shut down everything that cannot. I will spend every day of the rest of my life proving that the man I was is not the man I am becoming." The rain fell softly outside. The candlelight held steady. And in that moment, between the two of them, something that had been broken began to heal. 1 year later, Lena Wells no longer delivered food on a broken scooter. She managed Corsetti's, a position that came with a real salary, health insurance, and a future that did not require miracles to sustain. She had enrolled in nursing school and attended classes in the mornings before her shifts began. Emma was thriving. She had graduated from kindergarten and made her first real friend, a boy named Marcus whose mother brought him to the restaurant 3 times a week. Nicholas was different too. His men noticed it. He was less ruthless, more measured, as if Lena's presence had softened the edges of his darkness without weakening his strength. Illegal operations were shut down, not replaced. Legitimate businesses were expanded. A charitable foundation was created in Lena's grandmother's name, providing resources to women escaping domestic violence. Douglas Hale and Cordelia Blackwood were reduced to footnotes in the news cycle. News clips showed them in federal prisons, their power gone, their threats empty. Justice had not come in the form of death. Death would have been too quick, too easy, too merciful. Instead, they had been forced to watch everything they valued disappear, to spend the next 4 decades understanding that their empire had been built on broken people, and that broken people, when given one hand reaching out, could rise up and destroy them entirely. On a November evening, exactly 1 year after Lena had knelt on a highway in the rain with her face swollen and her throat bruised, she stood in the private booth at Corsetti's. The city lights of Boston reflected off the wet pavement outside. The rain was falling again, not violent this time, not desperate, but gentle and cleansing. Nicholas stood across from her, and in his hand was a small velvet box. Emma, now 7 years old, was in the next room, asleep. But she had seen what was coming. She had drawn another picture that afternoon, the same 2 figures, the same sun, but this time there was a third figure, and the 3 of them were holding hands. "I spent 2 years dead," Nicholas said, his voice steady as stone. "I spent 2 years convinced that darkness was the only thing I deserved. But you showed me that even in the darkest night, there is always a hand reaching out. Lena Wells, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me where we remind each other, every single day, that we are not alone in this darkness anymore?" She said yes. She said it quietly, powerfully, the way someone says something that changes everything. She said it with her eyes wet with tears, with her hand pressed against his chest, feeling his heart beat beneath the expensive fabric of his suit, with the absolute certainty that this was the moment her old life ended and her new life began. The rain fell softly outside. 2 broken people who had found each other in the darkness now stood in the light, and they held each other like they were the only real things left in the world. Sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. Nicholas's hand had reached out to Lena. Lena's presence had reached into Nicholas's darkness and brought him back to the living. Neither of them could have survived alone. Together, they became something stronger than either of them had ever been. If this story moved your heart, please hit that like button right now. Share it with someone who needs to hear that help can come from the most unexpected places, that redemption is possible, even for the darkest among us. Subscribe, because tomorrow we have another story about second chances, about people who refuse to give up, about the power of one hand reaching out in the darkness. Leave a comment below. Have you ever had someone reach out to you at your lowest moment? What did it mean to you? Let's talk about it. Every comment you leave is a precious source of motivation that helps us continue creating stories that remind the world about the power of love, mercy, and second chances. We wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. No matter how hard life gets, remember that after the rain, the sky clears. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We will see you again in the next video. Goodbye.